My name is Tyler Smith. I go by TD Smith because if you Google Tyler Smith, you get considerably more results than TD Smith. That is the entire reason. TD Smith sounds maybe more like an author kind of name. Anyway, it feels really unnatural, but I'm going to be TD Smith today because I'm up in front of you. This is a talk about the book I wrote called Goodnight Server Room. We're going to go through a little introduction of who I am, and then we'll talk about the story of the book, where it came from, what my goals are, some challenges that I encountered in making this book, and a couple places it applies to software. And then at the very end, because this is a good night book, the last thing we will do is all read a book together. Before I talk about who I am, I like to start this kind of thing with a pitch. If you're going up to your boss or a manager or somebody and you want something, it's good to start by saying, here is what I want from you. And what I want you guys to do is to start, just think of one person or a couple people that you know that are trying to do some kind of goofy new project that's not their job, but maybe it's a band that they're starting on the weekend, or maybe they're painting, or a poet, or who knows. The biggest thing I learned from this process is that trying to start something like that is really hard, and trying to get people to just give 10 seconds to looking at what you're doing is really hard. And things like Facebook shares and recommendations, or just showing up at a cafe to hear somebody play guitar, one person makes a huge difference. So that's the takeaway that I want you to have from this talk, is to find that one person you know who's trying to do something a little bit outside of the box and find a way to support them. I am a father of two very creative, goofy little engineers, Soren and Raleigh. There's Raleigh, and Soren are 1 and 3 years old. And I'm married to Rosalind, who is here, right there. Now. And I am a software engineer. I've been professionally programming for 8-ish years. I've gotten to see a lot of big, goofy things and travel around the country. And it's been an incredible experience. And I realized I can look through the pile of books that my sons have, and there are books about rabbits and tractors and farms, and there's nothing I could find that I can read to them and say, look, this is what I do. Because my son right now is like, I want to be a firefighter, I want to be a farmer, and those careers are awesome. But I want to at least add, be like Dad, into the mix of his ideas of what he could be in the future. And I looked at a lot of the books that are available right now, and so many of them focus on like 8, 9, 10-year-olds, and they dive right into, let's learn computing, let's learn how to program in Python, let's use Minecraft. And that's really cool, but I want to start a step back from that and just have my kids understand this is a computer. And that's a starting point. It's just, this is a computer, and then we'll build up from there. In the same way that they know what an excavator is. They couldn't tell you how it works or how to use it, but we can drive down the street and go, oh, excavator. And then just freeze for a while. There are a couple of children's books that I have read hundreds of times. All the parents just laughed. That were big inspirations for Goodnight Server Room. The first is Goodnight, Goodnight Construction Site, which is a book that goes through and says goodnight to a bunch of different trucks on a construction site. And it's because of that book that I know the difference between a crane and a bulldozer and a dump truck and an excavator. The second book that I took a lot of inspiration from was Elemental Peas. And I just love the level of detail and energy that that book has. It always has something new to find when you read it for the 10th time or 20th time, because there's so much going on. It's pushing the Where's Waldo level of shenanigans on every page. To do this, I took a page out of Wise Software Engineering, which is don't try to do everything yourself. If you can find somebody better at it, talk to them. You will save a lot of time and pain. So I teamed up with Emily Kruger, who's an illustrator based out of Minnesota. She does phenomenal work. She's actually done a couple projects for me in the past. And her work, as you can tell from this design, is not really what you think of when you think computers. If mushrooms and turtles and bugs are involved in your computers, it's probably not what you want. But what she brings in is a non-computing perspective that's going to, or that you can see it does, that takes something that could be boxy and hard and cold and make it warm and approachable, even though the content is technical. I also had a lot of help from my coworkers at Adventium Labs. I compensated them for their time. We took a few different trips to Uncle Frankie's in Northeast Minneapolis, where they did technical reviews of the content of this book. One of the big risks in writing a kid's book about computers that you'll learn from reading Amazon reviews is we are a very picky audience. There's a book called like HTML for Babies. And some of the comments are, well, you didn't close that tag correctly. Hold on now. So this is a technically accurate book. I've said some of my goals at a broad level, which were to introduce my boys to the concepts of what I work with and to the things that I work with. But I wanted to dig a little bit deeper than that and just plant some seeds in their minds of what computers do. And when I sat down to write this, I thought the main thing computers do, a hard drive spins or lights blink, but really what we care about is data. So data, which are these little guys, are the true focus of this book. Everything that happens going in and out of a computer is tied to data. And so the core concept that I wanted them to take away was we have all these different things in a server room, and all of them involve the flow of data or the storage of data or manipulation of data. This is a little bit of a brainstorming snapshot of the evolution of how I presented data to the reader. On the far left, you can see my artistic ability. And then that evolved. Emily and I followed a iterative process. I don't know if it was agile, but followed an iterative process where I would sketch up something and say, take this and run with it. And I intentionally gave sparse detail on some of the visual things because I wanted to let her run with it. So we started with this simple kind of tessellation concept and then expanded that into these little guys. One concept that came out of this brainstorming of how do we present data to the reader was the idea that there are varying complexities of data. You can have very simple, very small pieces of data, which is a bit, and you can combine bits to come up with bytes or packets that can carry more information or do more interesting things. So we presented that with this evolution in visual complexity that is not directly stated to the reader, because no little kid wants to read. The number of vertices in this diagram indicates the complexity. but they can see that there are simple things with very few lines, there are slightly more complicated things, and then there are much more complicated things. These are all kinds of data that play a role and travel through a server room. Now I'm going to take that evolution and we'll look at that again from a broader perspective. Again, we're looking at artwork evolution. I started with a very, very rough sketch of here's some words, they're going to go on a page. Can you put some servers on it with some data doing things? And then Emily and I worked from there. And I would just give simple feedback on, yes, I like where this is going, or I think we need to be clearer about this. And then we would iterate again. Each time we iterated on something, we tried to spend a reasonable amount of time, and I would tell Emily up front, we may scrap this entire thing and throw it away. Don't spend too much time on it. We just want to try to take steps forward in the concepts. So here we're seeing a couple of different servers. The goal of this particular diagram is to show that there are lots of different shapes and sizes of computers, but internally you see the same patterns and the same components repeated over and over. After we established the layout of each page, we did a round of color design where we established a palette of colors, and then we'd go back and forth coloring each page. Those of you that were here a couple months ago for the Masters of Science in Software Engineering talk I did, this was the only part that was done. So they all got to see the colored artwork, but they didn't get to see the final artwork, which is really, really cool. This is a snapshot of the final artwork. We started from these pencil and paper sketches with digitally added color, and then Emily stepped back from that, and once we had that established, actually took, I think 15 by 15 pieces of painting paper and painted the backgrounds. Then we digitally added the characters on top of that. So the process we followed for construction of the final art was fairly similar to the old Disney movies where they would have a nice painted backdrop and then they could animate on top of that. That let us do a lot of rearranging and editing and tweaking to the contents of the page while still keeping the background very polished and finished and precise. So I asked you at the beginning of this talk to think about somebody working on a goofy project. I'm going to remind you again, because most people need to be told 3 or 4 times before something really sticks. So remember, marketing is hard. Support your friends that are trying to market something. To give a little more information on how that's hard, I tried a few different things. I did Facebook marketing, Google ads. I did stickers, which hopefully everyone has a sticker right now. If not, they're at the table. Far and away, going out and talking to people is both the most scary thing to do and the most effective. Facebook and Google advertising kind of works, but you get like 3 seconds of somebody looking at what you have and then they're off to something else. So unfortunately, for most of this crowd, the best marketing advice I can give is you have to go shake people's hands who you've never met before and start talking, which is really intimidating, but easily the best way to get an idea into the world. I am in the process of hunting down a publisher for Goodnight Server Room. Another thing you learn publishing a book is you get rejected a lot. It gets easier and easier, but these are some examples of letters I've gotten from literary agents who are generally very cordial, but some are more terse, some are helpful. The lesson here is you just have to keep trying, and I'd like to stand here and say, and then you'll succeed, but I have not succeeded yet. I've just gotten a lot of rejection letters. Nevertheless, with Kickstarter and other platforms, you don't have to convince an agent that your idea is worth their time to be able to make something cool. The last thing I want to talk about pulls us back to software engineering one more time, and that's about requirements and the difficulty of communicating requirements. As one of the Kickstarter rewards, I had a coffee cup that I was going to give out to backers. And so Emily and I came up with this coffee cup design. It's going to have some bits on the front and some cool binary data on the back. Fairly straightforward. And I said, all right, let's do one kind of silly thing. I want you to take one of the zeros and turn it into a bug. And that ties into a running theme in the book that you'll want to look for later of there's a bug hidden on every page of the book. So I said, let's turn one of the zeros into a bug. That sounds pretty straightforward, but requirements in natural language are notoriously slippery. So I said, turn one of the zeros into a bug. She said, oh, the sleeping bits are zero value bits. I'll just turn it into a bug. Like, okay, well, no, I meant on the back of the cup, turn one of those into a bug. And she said, oh, you mean the letter O? I said, oh, we're so close. And then on third try of this one sentence requirement, we got a bug hidden there. So requirements are hard. Before I go into reading the book, I want to give a shout out to Andamio Games, which is a company that is run by Adam Gordon over here. I laser pointed right at your face. Adam approached me and said, Andamio makes educational iOS games. They do, right now, a game on neuroscience that forces students to work together and use neuroscience terminology out loud in a classroom. If you've ever tried to get students to say things out loud in a classroom, that is incredibly hard. And they have a game that pushes this and encourages this and is really effective. And they're working on a tool called, oh, my box is gone. All right, I'll just tell you out loud. They're working on a tool called Forge that lets a non-technical teacher or instructor take content in PowerPoint and generate an iOS game from that PowerPoint. So instead of having to learn how to write in Swift to write a game, they can say, I know PowerPoint, I have the important pieces, which are my story, graphics, my content. I just want to make the students engage with this directly. And Forge is a tool that lets them do that. And they offered to let me be a beta tester of Forge to make a game version of Goodnight Server Room. So I'm going to be working on that in the next few months and hopefully releasing that as the educational pairing for teaching your 2 to 4 year olds, or possibly older, about computers. So if you have questions on that, you can talk to Adam. But now, if you're all comfortable, you can lean up against your neighbor if you want. We're going to read the book. Stay bright, green status light, blinking, thinking through the night, through chips and cords and circuit boards, in server rooms, the data zoom. You get bonus points if you find all the bugs. A server rack looks like a stack. Cold air goes in, hot out the back. It holds computers way up high, sending data far and wide. Each one is special, this one, and this one, and this one too. Whether making, taking, or passing through, each machine has a job to do. Between them, data rush to find the destinations on their minds. The switch can guide them to and fro, telling each one where to go. Voltage going up and down is how most data get around. But there's another means of flight. Fiber cables transfer light. With data zipping at all angles, the paths might seem like crazy tangles. Let's group them up. Here, green, blue, pink. These networks will suffice, I think. Need to zip from green to blue? The router knows what should go through. Some data leave, go far and wide, while others prefer to stay inside. With buttons left and buttons right, the keyboard's keys are tucked in tight. To tell a computer what to do, the keyboard's just the thing for you. A mouse might not be what you think. It doesn't squeak or jump or wink. It moves around with extra care and tells the server, look here, look there. Servers fit in many spaces. Still data run familiar races. Despite their shape, inside the cases are the same parts in different places. Once the cable ride is ended, they're picked up, packed up, checked and amended. And when they're set from tip to top, they hop on a bus to their next stop. A hard drive spins so very fast. Put data here to make them last. If all you need is short-term speed, RAM is what you need. The processor is like a brain. It thinks and won't complain. No problem is too big or small. The processor solves them, one and all. Server room where data zoom. Your admin team will be back soon. Keep working hard to send each byte. Keep blinking bright all through the night. Thank you very much. All right, if there's any questions, Kevin has the microphone.
Hi.
Hi.
I was just wondering, have you read this to any children?
I have. I've read this to my 3-year-old.
Okay, did they like it?
He has every night for the last 3 nights asked to read the pewter book. He likes it a lot, but the concept we're working on that I think will take a few more iterations to really sink in is how data can flow from one thing to another. We all take this for granted right now, but he asked me, Dad, are there data in my room right now? And I said, yes. And he said, I don't like that. I don't want data in my room. There's. And I said, well, Soren, when my son's name is Soren, when we use FaceTime to call Grandma, when it looks and sees you smile, the data have to go from my phone through the air to Grandma's house. He said, how did they get through the window? I said, well, data are really, really small. They're just like the light that comes out of your light bulb. And he thought about that. So they're really small. Okay. So we're getting there.
Fun book, Tyler. First, I'll reinforce that my kids are 28 and 30, and I would have loved to have had a book like this when they were small, when they were about the age that Soren is now. I was working on the Boeing 777 on fault-tolerant avionics, and my daughter, I remember trying to figure out what I did on this airplane, and asked, "Do you paint the tails, Daddy?" So people in the room may not know you've written a novel before.
I did.
Now a children's book. What's next? Are you stuck with this writing bug?
I guess I kind of went in the wrong direction. I'm gonna have to go younger, I guess.
Prenatal music.
How about talk a little bit about the Kickstarter, lessons learned from that, how it went? Could you talk a little bit about that?
So I used Kickstarter as a fundraising platform for Goodnight Server Room. By and large, I think Kickstarter is a phenomenal platform for helping people find your work. It generates much, much more traffic, web traffic, than if you have just a website or you have a Facebook page. the beauty of Kickstarter for a project like this is people go there looking for projects. One of the most difficult parts of online advertising is you can reach a wide audience, but very few of them are actually like looking to buy something, or even fewer are looking to put money into a project that's going to take 6 months to finish. So Kickstarter was a great platform for that. The primary lesson learned out of Kickstarter is everything is going to cost more than you think it's going to cost. I sat down and costed out everything and thought I had a pretty good plan, but it turns out, for example, shipping 2,000 books is not free. That's a lot of books and a lot of weight. And things like that are going to show up. I'd like to tell you that you'll be able to think it all through beforehand and have a good number of what it's going to cost, but to be honest, you should just have a management overrun plan and just assume that you're going to go past whatever you predicted by a decent margin. I'd say if it's something you've never done before, give yourself a 50% buffer of what you expect to spend versus what you will actually need to spend.
What is the most valuable feedback that you've received, and where did it come from?
I'm going to jump back a couple pages. So a couple of answers to that. I mentioned earlier I took some coworkers to Uncle Frankie's. Oops, there we go. And I went into this really wanting it to be technically sound. And the first piece of advice I got was I originally had the word subnet here, which is one of those engineering things that's mostly correct, but not quite correct. So a simple piece of advice was just step back a little bit further and use a slightly more generic term that can be generally applicable. But another piece of advice from that conversation was originally the text for these servers fit in many spaces page was fairly confusing. It was talking about how design patterns inside a server align with one another. And that's something that maybe makes sense to an engineer if you talk about it for 20 minutes, but to a 3-year-old, it's just gone. And so a coworker of mine named Mike Nielsen said, why don't you just step back a little bit further and just say, there's lots of different shapes of computers, but they've got the same stuff inside. That's really what you're trying to say. And that completely reworked this page and turned it into a much, much clearer, much better explanation of what happens and what's the same between computers.
I've run into this at work. What about the bus breaking down?
If the bus breaks down, the data can walk.
So I was going to ask you, if you go to the page with the subnets or the networks, right? It's interesting, I think, that you got feedback on that. But what really struck me here was the word suffice. Because I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I think they would probably just let it go if I read this book to them. But eventually one of them would just go, what does that mean? And so I'm saying, like, I have a lot of enthusiasm for this, but I hope you find somebody that this fits better. I'm going to pass on. I'm kidding. It's like the agents.
You're killing me.
No, but did you get feedback on the vocab you used relative to the age group you're trying to hit?
The feedback I'd say I care most about was just that my son started to use the word data out loud. Like, he's 3, so he has a fairly wide vocabulary. And I intentionally use words that are 1 or 2 steps ahead of him, because if I just speak at his level, he's not going to be hearing things and stepping forward. But I was just really happy when he said, oh, there's data, there's data moving. Like that is completely meeting the goal of what I wanted him to take away as a 3-year-old. Doesn't have the right number of syllables.
How many iterations did it take you to get down the actual text, and how did you know when you had it just right?
I still don't know if I have it just right, but like all engineering problems, you have to at some point say, this is good enough. It's hard to put a number on the iterations. I've been working on this for 18 months or so. The core flow of the book has been established for about a year. I finished the last tweaks to the text about 2 months ago. I have a kind of laundry list of potential topics that I could touch on. There are some other concepts like what is a cache that are kind of fun, but I couldn't come up with a way that I really liked to present it. I also had a perhaps silly reason that I decided to stop where I did, which is that at the end of the book, with exactly the number of pages it has, the integer overflows and everybody's asleep. And if I'd added or taken away any verses, then we just have a bigger number, and so I wanted everyone to be asleep at the end.
Can you talk about I assume you went to publishers first, or did you go to Kickstarter right away? And then what led you to decide Kickstarter over maybe an agent or publishers?
Sure. The primary thing I think that motivated me was I wrote a novel last year, and I spent a long time trying to find an agent for that, and it just was not going anywhere. And I'm not in this project to make money and get a big name book out. I just literally want to read this book to my kids. And Kickstarter was a much more direct path. It's also a conduit that connects much more quickly to engineers. I learned pretty quickly that a lot of literary agents are not IT people at the same time. And so it just kind of either went over their heads or they didn't see why it was interesting. But Kickstarter let me pitch this directly to engineers.
Question around how you're going to connect to the 3 and 4-year-olds. When it comes to the language, I think the story you told about data and the light that's coming from your light bulb, I think when you look at the next version of this, implementing something like that, where your own child said, oh, I get it, and that connection was made. Maybe you've actually thought of that already, but if you can implement that in some of the wording there to say it's like something that they can connect to immediately, may be helpful in making that connection a lot sooner.
Yeah, absolutely. What I would love is to actually have a oscilloscope to hook up to like a serial channel and say, look right here, you can see literally voltage going up and down. This is your data. 4-year-old that might get through. There's a level of abstraction that's hard to jump past. That was the main reason I opted to go with the simple anthropomorphized data as opposed to trying to be literal, is I'm aiming for that concept of what they do, data do things inside a computer, without having the book hinge on a technically correct understanding of how data are encoded or how they work.
Hi, I love the idea. I think it's great. One question I have is, anyone who has an idea, whether they're an artist or an entrepreneur, a lot of they'll have this great idea kicking around their head, and they maybe talk about it with people, but taking that step to implement it and actually, start creating something from it is a whole nother ballgame. What was for you the point where you're like going from your head to actually taking those first steps, and then just from those first steps, kind of turning it into something real?
There are, I'd say, 2 things that really help in that process. The first is my wife was really encouraging through this and just said, oh yeah, that's a cool idea, you should do that. And if you have that one go-to person to be like, yes, I support you in this ridiculous thing that you want to do for fun, that goes a long way. Another upside of Kickstarter is it puts you on a timeline, and it obligates you to get something done, because a whole bunch of people have now trusted you with their money to do this thing. So the way I approached this is I had a draft of the story written. I paid Emily to do the cover art, and then I put it out there, and I knew that if this gets funded, I don't have a choice anymore. This is now, I have to do this. And that's motivating, because it's not a whole bunch of strangers that funded this. It's some strangers and some people sitting here that I need to see every day, and they're going to want their books.
Thank you.
A brief reassurance for those of you who have not received books. I ordered them last night, and I'll be getting a paper proof in about 3 weeks, and then I will be getting about 2,000 books in 2 to 4 months, I think.
So did you so you had to pay the publisher to get these books? And this follow-up is, if we help it take off, I mean, do you stand to make some money in this?
Sure. There's an important terminology distinction. A publisher is somebody who pays to have your book printed and then distributes that book and markets that book. So most bookstores are receiving books from publishers. So like Random House is a publisher. So if Target has a bunch of books, they're most likely just getting books from, 10, 15, 20 different publishers. That's a conventional publisher. Then there are vanity publishers, which are really publishers in name only. They just will print 10 copies of your thing so you can have a physical copy. Then there are printers who just do the physical manufacturing. An important legal distinction is with a publisher, you are signing a contract that says the publisher gets to distribute it, they get to take some of the money, you get a chunk of that money. A printer says you retain the copyright, all the intellectual property, we are just making the physical thing for you and sending it back. So the upside of using a printer, which is what I'm doing, is I get the books at cost and I can sell them at whatever profit margin I want. If I go with a if I go with a publisher, they have a much wider distribution channel, but I get a much smaller portion of the price of each book.
So how difficult was it going from like a technical description to like a child-friendly rhyme?
It takes a long time to go from the idea to what you want. I mentioned earlier working on this page. So I started after a conversation with Mike at Uncle Frankie's with, I want to show that you'll find the same stuff in all these different computers. That took probably 2 hours or so of just writing down computer words. I sat by the fire in the backyard with a glass of scotch and just wrote down computer words and then just tried out ideas until I felt like I had something I liked. No, I like, this is entirely tangential. I like scotch because you can drink it incredibly slowly, and like a half shot of scotch will last you 2 or 3 hours because you do not want to drink scotch really fast.
All right, so I'm a bit of a bad participant. I missed your Kickstarter. How do I get a copy of the book and/or support you?
So the book is available for pre-order right now at gsr.smithdtyler.com. If you pick up a sticker in the back, that URL is at the bottom of every sticker. That will redirect you to an Etsy page where you can pre-order the book. There you go. So gsr.smithdtyler.com. All right. Well, no more hands are up. So thank you all very much for coming and listening.